I killed my first 3 tomato plants in a single summer, and it wasn't because of bad soil or bad water. It was slugs, aphids, pill bugs. By the time I figured out what was eating them, the plants were gone. If you've ever stood over a chewed-up seedling and wondered why your money keeps walking back to the garden center for another bottle of spray, I want you to hear me out. Gloria, my old neighbor in San Francisco, never bought a pesticide in 20 years on her balcony. She used eggshells. A specific way at a specific time, with one small detail the industry has spent decades letting people forget. Stick around to the end, because that detail, the one extra step Gloria taught me, is what separates a shell that works from a shell that just sits there. Here's the thing, the reason most of us walk back to the garden center with a credit card in our hand isn't because chemical sprays are the only thing that works. It's because they're the only thing anybody bothered to tell us about. And that didn't happen by accident. After World War II, this country had a giant problem nobody talks about anymore. The chemical plants that had been cranking out nitrogen for explosives and chlorinated hydrocarbons for the war effort still had all that capacity sitting there with no military buyer. So those companies pivoted. The American home garden became the new market. And in 1947, Congress passed the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, which created a brand new legal category called the Registered Pesticide Product. To get into that category, you had to have a product. Something you could put a label on, a price tag on, a patent number on. A free kitchen scrap could never enter that category because there was nothing to register and nothing to sell. So free methods didn't get banned. They just got crowded out of the recommendation column year by year, decade by decade, until they vanished from the pamphlets and the magazines and the extension flyers most of us grew up reading. The home pest control industry is now worth somewhere around $4 billion a year in the United States, and the average household spends roughly $70 to $100 annually on garden pest products. I want to be honest with you. I was one of those households. I killed 3 tomato plants, walked into the garden center, and walked back out with a $14 bottle of spray because that was the only solution anybody had ever put in front of me. This isn't a conspiracy in a dark room. It's a slow forgetting. And the thing that got forgotten is sitting in your trash can right now. Let me tell you what Gloria does, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Gloria Chen lived in the apartment above mine in San Francisco. Retired 4th grade teacher, originally from Taiwan, in her 70s when I met her. And she had been gardening on her balcony for 20 years without ever buying a single bottle of pesticide. Every morning, after she cracked eggs for breakfast, she rinsed the shells under the tap, set them on a paper towel on the windowsill above the sink to dry, and at the end of the week, she dropped them into a quart mason jar she kept right next to the stove. That jar was always there. That jar was her arsenal. Eggshells. The thing most of us scrape into the trash without a second thought. Gloria treated them like a tool, because that's what they are. She would tell me, in her quiet teacher's voice, that there was nothing magic about it, that she didn't invent anything, that her own grandmother had done some version of this in Taiwan long before any of the chemical companies existed. And here's the part that gets me. No extension pamphlet I ever read mentioned that jar. Not one. Now let me explain how this actually works, because I want you to understand it, not just trust me on it. There are 2 things happening at the same time, and both of them matter. The first one is physical. When you crush an eggshell down to the right texture, what you're looking at under any magnification is calcium carbonate with edges as sharp as broken glass. To you and me, it feels like sand. To a slug or a pill bug or a snail crawling across it on a soft underbelly, it's a field of razors. Soft-bodied pests cross that barrier and get lacerated. They cut themselves, they dry out, they turn around. Aphid nymphs that fall off a leaf and try to climb back up land in that same field and can't make it home. The second thing is slower, but it's just as important. As those shells sit on the soil surface in rain and watering wash trace minerals down into the root zone, your plant takes up calcium. And calcium is what builds cell walls. The leaves on a calcium-fed plant are physically tougher, less tender, less sweet. Aphids prefer soft tissue. They probe a tough leaf, decide it's not worth the work, and move on. So you've got a physical barrier on the ground and a tougher plant above it, working together. This is exactly the kind of detail that disappears when the recommendation gets written by somebody who's also selling a bottle. Let me give you the numbers because I know that's what makes it real. Gloria, 20 years on a San Francisco balcony every year, tomatoes and bok choy and basil and ginger, and 0 pesticides. Not one bottle, not one spray, not one trap. Me, I lost 3 out of 3 tomato plants the summer before I started doing this. 3 out of 3. The following summer, after Gloria walked me through her method, I pulled 47 pounds off 2 plants. 47 pounds. And the $14 bottle of spray I would have bought? Never bought it. Never bought one after. I now track this stuff because I'm a numbers guy at heart, and I use about 2 dozen shells per raised bed per season. 2 dozen. That's roughly 2 weeks of breakfast in my single-guy kitchen. The math on this is so embarrassing for the industry, it almost feels rude to say out loud. A household that drops $80 a year on sprays for 20 years has handed $1,600 to a problem their breakfast trash could have solved. That's the cost of the forgetting. All right, now here's where most general audience advice falls apart, and where Gloria's method actually starts to separate from the watered-down version you see online. The specific way. The specific time. Most folks who try eggshells scatter a handful across the bed, water it in, and walk away. Then they come back 2 weeks later with chewed plants and they say, "See, it doesn't work. Here's what Gloria taught me. You don't scatter. You build a continuous ring around the base of each individual stem, 2 inches wide, all the way around with no gaps. Not a sprinkle, not a dusting. A ring. Slugs and pill bugs are not stupid. They will find the gap. If there's a half-inch break in your ring, that's the gate they walk through. So the ring has to be unbroken. Roughly a tablespoon of prepared shell per seedling does it. The specific time matters just as much. You lay it down at dusk because slugs and pill bugs are night active. They come out as the sun goes down and they feed in the dark. You're setting the barrier right before the parade starts, and you lay it down within the first 14 days after transplant, because that's when seedlings are most vulnerable, when one bad night can take a whole plant. After heavy rain, anything more than a light mist, you replenish. Rain washes the edges flatter and pushes the shells offline. 2 minutes with the jar, and you're back in business. This is the protocol. This is the part that nobody putting it on a blog post ever bothers to write out, because it doesn't fit in 3 sentences, and there's nothing to link to a product page at the end. And even with everything I've just told you, I want to be straight with you. There is still one more step in Gloria's method, the step that decides whether the shells in your ring actually do the work or just sit there looking pretty. Stick with me, because that step is coming. Now, if what I'm showing you today is making sense, if you're starting to realize that the answers to most of the pest problems in your kitchen garden have been sitting in your trash can the whole time, the full system lives in my book, The 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol, $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. The one I want to point you to specifically today is Chapter 10, Troubleshooting, which walks through every common container pest, aphids, fungus gnats, soft-bodied chewers, the whole crew, using the same kitchen scrap zero spray approach we're talking about right now. If you're on your TV, point your phone at the QR code on screen. If you're on a phone or a laptop, the link is right in the description below. Take a second, grab your phone, get it unlocked. I'll wait right here. No rush. When you've got it pulled up, come on back and let's keep going, because the next part is where this gets really interesting. All right. So why did this get buried? Why isn't the eggshell ring on the front page of every gardening pamphlet in America? Here's the thing. It comes down to 3 pieces, and once you see them lined up, you can't unsee them. First piece is economic. A kitchen scrap cannot be patented, it cannot be branded, it cannot be registered under FIFRA, because there is no active ingredient to register and no company name to put on the bottle. The home pest control market in this country is worth roughly $4 billion a year. Eggshells contribute exactly $0 to that number. So no company has ever had a financial reason to fund a study on them, or pay a sales rep to drop off literature at a garden center, or buy an ad in a gardening magazine that mentions them. The free option doesn't have a marketing budget. The bottle does. Second piece is institutional. Starting in the 1950s, the land-grant universities that run the cooperative extension programs, the same extensions that print the pamphlets your grandma used to read, increasingly took funding from chemical companies for their ag research. Over the next few decades, the recommended practice publications coming out of those programs shifted slowly toward branded product solutions. The free methods didn't disappear from the science. They disappeared from the pamphlets. That's what I meant earlier when I said this wasn't a ban. It was a slow forgetting. A crowding out. Third piece. And I want to be honest with you here, because if I'm not, this whole thing falls apart. Eggshells are not a silver bullet. They don't stop flying adult aphids that land on the upper leaves. They don't stop tomato hornworms, which are big enough to laugh at a calcium edge. They don't stop fungal disease. You will hear people say, eggshells don't break down fast enough to release calcium into the soil, and I want to address that head on, because that critique is about whole shells tossed in the bed. It is not about properly prepared shells. And properly prepared is exactly the detail the suppression erased. Now tie that back to your wallet. If a household spent $80 a year on sprays for 20 years, that's $1,600 walked out the door, plus whatever you lost in peace of mind about what you were breathing, plus the autonomy of knowing you could have solved the problem yourself with breakfast scraps. And even with everything I've just told you, there's still one step most people get wrong. The step that decides whether your shells actually work or just sit there. Here it is. The step Gloria taught me. After you crush the shells, you spread them on a sheet pan and you bake them at 200 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes before the final grind. That's it. That's the detail. Here's why it matters. Inside every shell, there's a thin membrane and a film of dried egg white. That stuff is protein and moisture. If you skip the bake, those organic residues pull humidity out of the air. The shells go soft within days, the membrane rots, and the microscopic cutting edges round off. Slugs walk right over them. With the bake, the shells stay brittle for months. The edges stay razor sharp at a microscopic scale. The barrier actually does its job. The second half of the detail is the texture. Gloria grinds to a coarse sand consistency, about the texture of kosher salt, not powder. Powder washes away in the first watering and gives you no cutting edge to speak of. Not chunks either. Chunks leave gaps, and slugs find gaps. Here's the test. Pour a pinch into your palm and rub it between your fingers. If it stings the soft skin between your fingers, it's right. If it feels like flour, it's too fine. Start over. This is the step every general audience eggshell tip leaves out, which is exactly why the technique got a reputation as doesn't really work. It doesn't if you skip the bake. Gloria's rule was simple. If you wouldn't trust it to cut a snail, don't put it in the ring. Now you've got the part of this that got buried: the bake, the texture, the ring, the timing. If you want the full closed-loop system that this technique fits inside, that's exactly what the 30-day kitchen scrap garden protocol walks you through. It's the guide I wish I'd had 10 years ago, back when I was killing tomato plants in my Portland apartment. The chapter I want to point you to this time is Chapter 6, Composting in Small Spaces, because after your shells have done their job on the soil surface, they break down into the bed and feed calcium to the next round of plants. Chapter 6 walks through the small space composting loop, worm bins, bokashi, the whole thing, that turns this one-off pest trick into a continuous cycle. $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. If you're on your TV, scan the QR code on screen. If you're on your phone, the link is in the description. Go ahead and pull it up now. Take your time. I'll be right here. So that's the whole thing. A free kitchen scrap, baked at 200 degrees, ground to the texture of kosher salt, laid in a 2-inch ring around each stem at dusk, kept Gloria's balcony pest-free for 20 years, and saved my first real tomato crop after I'd lost 3 plants in a single summer. Now you've got the prepared shell method and the placement detail that got quietly crowded out of every recommendation column in the country. Next time around, I'm going to walk you through the banana peel potassium drench I use when my tomatoes start setting fruit. Another scrap nobody in the magazine column ever told me about. Drop a note in the comments and let me know which one you're going to try this on first. Slugs, aphids, or pill bugs. Until next time, keep growing your own food, my friend.